tougher, impersonating a seal. That's all he said. No one asked how she disarmed a Marine mid-flashback in 2 seconds flat. No one asked how her whisper pulled him back from a war only he could see. They didn't care that she saved lives. They saw the seal pin on her denim jacket and decided she was a fraud. But the footage didn't lie. It went viral. And when the Admiral walked into that precinct, he didn't request an interview. He issued a warning. You just cuffed a legend. They didn't know her name. They only knew the code name whispered in blacked-out files, Phantom 7. This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week, like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The fluorescent lights in the community center's basement hummed with a weary, flickering monotony, casting harsh, elongated shadows across a circle of mismatched folding chairs. The air was thick with the scent of old coffee, damp concrete, and the unspoken weight of collective trauma. This was a sanctuary, a fragile bubble of shared pain and cautious hope, held together by the quiet authority of Dr. Clara Mendoza. She sat with a placid, professional expression, her posture the only thing keeping the group from dissolving into the very chaos they met to contain. Among the veterans gathered was Tessa Linford, a woman who seemed to occupy the space between the light and the shadows. In her mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent dark eyes and short, practical hair, she wore a weathered denim jacket that had seen better days. Her demeanor was one of relaxed alertness, a calm that felt less like peace and more like a finely tuned instrument at rest. Her eyes, dark and perpetually scanning, moved from face to face, not with curiosity, but with the practiced awareness of someone who had long ago learned to read a room for threats, not just emotions. On the lapel of her jacket, a tiny, almost faded Navy SEAL trident pin caught the light. A small, almost insignificant detail that most people in this room, so caught up in their own battles, would never even notice. It was a detail that would soon unravel everything. Dr. Mendoza, a woman whose every movement was steeped in the careful, measured patience of a seasoned therapist, was speaking. Her words, though well-intentioned and precise, seemed to bounce off the walls of the veterans' inner turmoil, unable to penetrate the thick layers of scar tissue. She spoke of coping mechanisms, of anchors to the present, of reframing the past, but the air remained heavy, static, thick with the unsaid. The veterans shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, a silent symphony of restless hands and twitching legs, each one a testament to battles fought far from this quiet basement. There was a young man named Jared Hightower, a Marine barely out of his teens whose trembling hands were a constant, frantic blur. He sat hunched over, his gaze fixed on a point in the chipped concrete floor, trapped in a timeline only he could see. Next to him was Maria Santis, a former gang member and recent releasee from a correctional facility whose tough-as-nails facade barely concealed the hypervigilance of a life lived on the edge. Her shoulders were perpetually hunched, as if expecting a blow from an unseen enemy. And then there was Ray Delgado. Ray was a big man, a former Marine whose career had been cut short by a training injury, leaving him with a perpetual scowl and a bitterness that clung to him like a second skin. He had a chip on his shoulder the size of a small-town monument, a deep-seated resentment for anyone who had seen real combat, who had earned the glory that he felt had been unjustly stolen from him. He watched the group, but his eyes were always unfailingly on Tessa. He saw the way she sat, a silent statue of controlled power, and he saw that pin. He had tried to become a SEAL, had failed in the brutal, soul-crushing selection process, and the pin on her lapel was a personal insult, a taunt from a woman he believed had no right to wear it. He saw her as a fraud, a pretender in a room full of real soldiers, and his silent animosity was a live wire waiting for a spark. Jared Hightower's whisper, When it finally came, was a frayed thread of sound that cut through the monotonous hum of the lights. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice barely audible, shaking with an almost unbearable terror. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that convoy. I hear the IED, smell the burning metal, see Jackson." His voice cracked, a fragile vase shattering. Dr. Mendoza leaned forward, her face a mask of practiced empathy, ready to offer a soft, measured response. But before she could, a change came over Jared. It was swift and terrifying. His head snapped up, his eyes wide and unfocused, no longer seeing the fluorescent lights or the folding chairs, but a world of sand and fire. "They're coming through the walls!" He screamed, the words a primal, guttural cry that ripped the thin veil of sanity from the room. With a lightning-fast motion born of muscle memory, he pulled a combat knife from his boot, the glint of the blade a terrible flash in the dim light. The room erupted. Chairs screeched and scraped against the concrete floor as veterans scrambled backwards, their own combat instincts taking over. Some dove for cover, others froze in a state of petrified shock, their bodies locked in a primal fight-or-flight response. The chaos was instantaneous and absolute, a storm of panic and remembered fear. Dr. Mendoza, her placid composure finally shattered, reached for a small panic button hidden beneath her table. But Jared was already moving, lost in a flashback that had transported him back to the fiery streets of Fallujah. The knife was raised, his face contorted with a kind of fear and rage that only combat veterans could truly understand. He was a weapon, and his target was the nearest perceived threat, Dr. Mendoza. But before he could close the distance, Tessa moved. Her motion was not frantic or panicked, but a single fluid streak of controlled energy. It was like watching liquid mercury flow, a seamless blur of motion that defied the very laws of physics. She rose from her chair, closing the distance between herself and Jared in one smooth, predator-like motion. Her left hand shot out with a surgical precision, intercepting Jared's wrist and applying a sharp, targeted pressure to a nerve cluster that caused his fingers to involuntarily splay and release the weapon. The knife clattered to the floor with a deafening finality. Simultaneously, her right arm wrapped around his torso from behind, not in a chokehold, but in an embrace that somehow conveyed both absolute control and profound comfort. It was a paradox of strength and gentleness, a hold that was both a restraint and a life raft. "Easy, Marine," she whispered into his ear, her voice low and steady, carrying an authority that cut through his panic like a blade through silk. "You're safe. The convoy made it home. Jackson's alive. You're in San Diego, not Iraq. Feel the concrete under your feet. Smell the coffee from upstairs. You're home, warrior." Her words weren't just spoken, they were a form of psychological counter-assault, a series of grounding techniques that bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to his traumatized nervous system. The physical contact provided an anchor, the pressure points disrupted his fight-or-flight response, and her voice, calm and full of unwavering certainty, was the lighthouse guiding him back from the storm. Jared's wild, panicked breathing gradually slowed, his body trembling uncontrollably as the flashback's grip began to loosen. Within 90 seconds, the terror in his eyes was replaced by confusion, then a wave of profound sorrow. He sagged in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably, the knife on the floor forgotten, a forgotten relic of a war that had never left him. The room remained silent, a collective gasp of breath held and then slowly released. Tessa gently guided Jared back to his chair, her movements economical and purposeful. She knelt beside him, maintaining a steady, reassuring eye contact as she spoke to the group, her voice still quiet but now carrying an instructional tone. That technique I just used, it's something we developed for high-stress extractions. When your mind gets trapped in the past, you need an anchor to pull you back to the present. The pressure points disrupt the fight-or-flight response while the physical contact provides grounding. It's a way of forcing the brain to reconnect with its physical reality. Dr. Mendoza stared at Tessa with a mixture of shock, awe, and professional curiosity. She had spent decades in this field, and she had never seen anything so effective, so instantaneous. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I've never seen anything like it." Tessa's expression remained neutral, but for a brief flicker, something dangerous and ancient shone in her dark eyes, a ghost of the person she had once been. "Special operations," she said, her voice flat. "We had to know how to handle teammates who got compromised psychologically during missions. When you're operating behind enemy lines, you can't afford to have someone lose it." The words "special operations" hung in the air, a grenade with its pin pulled. The quiet that had settled over the room was shattered by the sound of Ray Delgado slowly rising to his feet, his face flushed with a violent building anger. Ray had been coming to the group for 6 months, ever since his medical discharge, and every day he carried the weight of his unfulfilled career, his anger a constant raging fire. He looked at Tessa, at the pin, and at the awe in the faces of the other veterans. The lie, as he saw it, was an affront to everything he held sacred. "You're full of it, lady," he spat, his voice rising, a low growl of pure resentment. "Special operations? You expect us to believe that? Women weren't even allowed in combat roles until recently, and they sure as hell weren't SEALs." He jabbed a trembling finger at the pin on her jacket. "That's stolen valor, and it's disgusting. You're sitting here lying to actual veterans, pretending you're something you're not. You're a fake." Tessa remained kneeling beside Jared, her expression unreadable. "I understand your skepticism, Ray," she said, her voice calm and even. "The timeline doesn't match public knowledge, and I'm not asking you to believe anything." But her calm only fueled his rage. "Don't give me that calm crap!" Ray's face was now bright red, spittle flying as he spoke. "I know guys who tried out for the SEALs. Real men who couldn't make it through buds. And you're sitting here with your little pin acting like you're some kind of operator. You probably bought that thing at a surplus store." Other group members began murmuring, some looking uncomfortable with Ray's aggression, while others seemed genuinely curious about Tessa's background. She had been attending for 8 months, always helpful, always insightful, but she rarely spoke about her own service beyond vague references to overseas deployments. "Ray, please sit down," Dr. Mendoza interjected, trying to regain control. But he was beyond reason now, lost in a storm of his own making. "No, I'm sick of this stolen valor crap. People like her make a mockery of real service members." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with fury. "I'm calling the MPs. Let them sort this out." Tessa finally stood, her movements so smooth and controlled that they seemed almost predatory. For a moment, a dangerous flicker crossed her features, a fleeting glimpse of the person she had been in darker places, doing darker things. Then it was gone, replaced by the same unnerving calm she always maintained. "That's your right, Ray," she said quietly. "But before you make that call, ask yourself why you're really angry. Is it about the pin, or is it about something else?" Her words were a laser beam of truth, hitting their mark with devastating precision. Ray's hand froze over his phone. His anger wasn't really about stolen valor. It was about his own failed dreams, his medical discharge, his sense of inadequacy compared to the combat veterans in the group. But pride and rage had taken control now, and there was no backing down. "Fuck you!" he snarled, his voice trembling with a mixture of shame and defiance, and he dialed the number. "Military police?" "Yeah, I want to report stolen valor. I've got a woman here claiming to be a Navy SEAL." As Ray spoke, Tessa caught Dr. Mendoza's eye and mouthed a single word, "Sorry." Then she returned to Jared's side, gently checking his pulse, ensuring he was stable, as if she hadn't just been accused of a federal crime. 20 minutes later, the sound of heavy uniformed boots echoed down the stairs as 2 LAPD officers and a military police officer entered the room, their expressions stern and professional. Tessa stood calmly, her hands visible and non-threatening as they approached. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the senior LAPD officer said, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "You're under arrest for violation of the Stolen Valor Act." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Tessa leaned close to Dr. Mendoza and whispered something that made the therapist's eyes widen in shock. The last thing the group saw was Tessa being led away, her head held high, and that same unsettling calm radiating from her like heat from a forge. Ray watched her go, a sick, hollow feeling growing in his stomach as he began to wonder if he had just made a terrible mistake, one that he could never take back. But the story didn't end there. The quiet community center had an old, grainy CCTV system, the kind that was mostly for show, but it was running, and it captured everything. An intern for the community center, tasked with checking the cameras after the chaos, saw the footage. They saw the sudden, terrifying lunge of Jared, the chaos of the room, and the impossibly fast, impossibly precise movements of Tessa. They saw her move like a trained assassin, like a ghost, disabling a full-grown man with a knife without so much as raising her voice. The footage, a mere 30 seconds of high-stakes, real-world drama, was unlike anything they had ever seen. The intern, a young kid who loved watching action movies and gaming videos, couldn't believe his eyes. He uploaded it to a private folder, then, for reasons he could never fully articulate, he sent a copy to a small online forum. And that video went viral. It was shared and reshared with a frantic energy that defied all reason. The quality was poor, the light was bad, but the action was undeniable. The comment sections exploded with speculation. Who is this woman? She moves like a professional. That's not just training, that's instinct. Did you see how she disarmed him? That's some serious Black Ops tea. She fights like a seal. The video, a short, terrifying glimpse into a world of controlled violence and quiet heroism, was the spark that set the tinderbox of public curiosity ablaze. Before the LAPD had even finished their initial paperwork, before Detective Isabel Marquez had even opened Tessa's file, a legend was already being born in the digital ether. The CCTV footage, a silent witness to a moment of grace under fire, had become a viral phenomenon, a digital phantom spreading through the country's nervous system, raising questions that no one, least of all the officers who had cuffed her, was prepared to answer. A simple stolen valor case had just been thrust into the national spotlight, and the world was about to discover that the woman they arrested was far more than just a civilian with a stolen pin. She was a legend, and her cover was already starting to crumble. The fluorescent lights in the LAPD Central Division hummed with a different kind of monotony than the basement of the community center. Here, the air was cold and sterile, smelling of cleaning solvents and stale paperwork. The chaos of the arrest, of Tessa Linford being led away in handcuffs, was a distant memory. Now she was just another suspect, a name on a file, a face on a booking photo. Tessa moved through the standard procedures with a quiet, cooperative efficiency that unnerved everyone she encountered. She gave her name, her date of birth, her address, her height and weight, all in a low, measured tone. There was no defiance, no complaint, no request for a lawyer. She was a ghost moving through a system designed to process tangible flesh and blood criminals, and her unnerving calm was a form of resistance more potent than any act of aggression. The duty officer noted her behavior in his report, unusually compliant. No requests for water, food, or communication. This was not the behavior of a nervous fraud. It was the behavior of someone who had been processed before, someone who knew exactly how the system worked and was simply waiting for her cue. Detective Isabel Marquez watched the security footage of Tessa's intake with a professional skepticism honed over a decade of police work. Isabel was in her late 30s, with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation as one of the most thorough investigators in the San Diego Police Department's military liaison unit. Her job was to navigate the complex and often messy intersection of civilian and military law, and in her experience, stolen valor cases were depressingly routine. They usually involved sad, desperate people, often with troubled pasts, seeking a form of validation they hadn't earned. The suspect would be an aging man with a poorly fitting uniform, a teenager looking for attention, or a veteran who had a legitimate claim but exaggerated it for personal gain. This one, with the viral video, was more high-profile than usual, but the core was likely the same. Isabel's expectation was to open a file and find a list of mundane Navy service, a story that didn't quite add up, and a quick confession. Her initial investigation began not in the interrogation room, but in the sterile digital landscape of military records. With a few practiced keystrokes, she brought up Tessa Linford's file. The result, however, was not what she expected. The file was not full of mundane service records, it was almost blank. What she found was a maze of redactions and classifications. Tessa's basic service record showed a standard Navy enlistment in 2015, completion of basic training at Great Lakes, and a series of duty stations that were entirely blacked out. Her discharge papers were marked administrative separation, but provided no details whatsoever. The most telling part was what wasn't there. No awards, no commendations, no medals. For someone claiming Special Operations Service, the file was suspiciously clean, a vacuum of information where a life of heroism should have been. It was a blank page where a legend was meant to be written. This vacuum of information was the first crack in Isabel's wall of skepticism. Most fakes were sloppy. They would claim awards they didn't earn, tell stories that could be easily fact-checked, or provide falsified records. Tessa's file was the opposite, a meticulous, almost surgical absence of information. It was as if someone had gone through it with a scalpel, removing every single piece of data that could possibly point to her real service. The level of classification was unusual, even for positions requiring a high-level security clearance. It was a file that screamed something is missing, and Isabel's investigator instincts, which had served her so well over the years, began to scream in a low, urgent hum. This was not a routine case. This was something else entirely. With the thin, almost empty file in her hand, Isabel made her way to interview room C. The room was a small, claustrophobic box, the metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A single, humming fluorescent light above them cast harsh, unforgiving shadows that seemed to magnify the tension in the room. Tessa sat with perfect posture, her breathing steady and controlled, a stark contrast to the nervous, fidgeting suspects Isabel usually faced. The dark eyes that Isabel had seen in the booking photos were even more intense in person, tracking her every movement with a practiced, predatory stillness that made the detective's skin crawl. This was not a scared woman. This was a patient, dangerous animal waiting for its cage to open. "Miss Linford, I'm Detective Marquez," Isabel began, her voice carefully modulated to sound professional and in control. She placed the thin file on the table between them, a silent but potent testament to the emptiness of Tessa's claims. "You've been arrested for violating the Stolen Valor Act, specifically for falsely claiming to be a Navy SEAL. Do you understand the charges?" Tessa's voice was low, calm and carried a slight accent Isabel couldn't quite place. "I understand what I've been accused of," she replied, her eyes never leaving Isabel's. "But I haven't made any false claims." Isabel opened the file with practiced efficiency. "Your military records show basic Navy service, nothing more. No SEAL training, no special operations background. Yet, witnesses at the Veteran Support Group heard you claim SEAL service and saw you wearing unauthorized insignia. What exactly do my records show, detective?" The question was a strange one, catching Isabel off guard. Most suspects either denied everything or launched into elaborate, often unbelievable justifications. Tessa seemed genuinely curious about the information, or lack thereof, available to the authorities. Standard enlistment, basic training, and... Isabel paused, realizing the full scope of how little she actually knew. Administrative discharge after 4 years. She looked at Tessa, the words hanging in the air. "And that's it. Your duty assignments, your training records, your deployment history, they're all classified. The file is, for all intents and purposes, a blank." Isabel felt a growing unease. This was a file that belonged to a ghost, not a person. Tessa leaned forward slightly, and Isabel noticed the calluses on her hands, rough and worn in a way that spoke of serious, brutal physical training, not administrative duties. The small detail, a silent but potent piece of physical evidence, contrasted sharply with the empty file. "Miss Linford," Isabel said, her voice softer, "the level of classification in your file is highly unusual, but it doesn't prove SEAL service. Many Navy positions require security clearances." Tessa's gaze was unblinking. "Detective, what do you know about Operation Leviathan Rift?" The blood in Isabel's veins turned to ice. The name, spoken so casually in that sterile room, was a whisper of a distant, dangerous memory. It was a name that should not exist in any public record. A ghost story whispered in hushed tones in secure military facilities. She had only heard it once, years ago, during a drunken Christmas dinner. Her brother, a Navy intelligence officer, had been a little too loose with his words, talking about a classified counterterrorism operation that had taken place in Syria. He had mentioned the name, then immediately regretted it, his face turning pale and sober as he realized what he'd said. "I don't know what you're talking about," Isabel lied, her voice a little too tight, her hands trembling imperceptibly. 18 hostages, Tessa continued, her voice taking on a distant, haunted quality, a storyteller recounting a grim fable. American contractors, captured by a splinter group calling itself the Black Hand. The official story was that a joint task force rescued them. What the public doesn't know is that the initial assault failed. 3 SEALs were killed in the first wave, and the hostages were moved to a secondary location. Isabel's mouth went dry. Her brother had mentioned the casualties, 3 operators who died in what was publicly reported as a training accident. The lie, now spoken with such casual certainty, felt like a physical blow. The rescue was completed by a 4-person team that officially doesn't exist, Tessa said, her eyes never leaving Isabel's face. They went in without backup, without air support, and without any hope of extraction if things went wrong. 2 of those hostages were CIA assets whose capture would have compromised ongoing operations across the Middle East. "How could you possibly know that?" Isabel whispered, the practiced composure of a decade of police work crumbling around her. Tessa's smile was cold and humorless. "Because I put 2 bullets in the terrorist leader's head while my teammate carried out the wounded CIA operative. Because I spent 6 hours in a spider hole waiting for extraction while enemy forces searched for us. Because I still have scars from the shrapnel that tore through my left shoulder when their RPG hit the building we were using for cover." She rolled up the sleeve of her t-shirt, revealing a network of intricate, white surgical scars that looked exactly like what Isabel would expect from a combat injury. The detective had seen enough wounded veterans to recognize the real thing when she saw it. The scars were not faked. They were an indelible mark of a war no one was supposed to know about. The operation was so classified that even our own command structure didn't know our real names. Tessa continued, her voice now a low, chilling narrative. We were ghosts, detective. Officially, we never existed. Unofficially, we saved 18 American lives and prevented an intelligence disaster that could have gotten dozens of other operatives killed. This unit, it was disbanded after that mission. Too many close calls, too many questions from oversight committees. We were given new identities and told to disappear. Some of us chose to stay disappeared. Isabel's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her notepad, her mind a frantic blur of shock and disbelief. You mentioned a teammate. Who else was on this mission? I can give you a name, but you won't find him in any database. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell. Isabel looked up sharply. Mitchell? As in Admiral James Mitchell? Tessa's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. You know him? He's the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Isabel paused, remembering news reports from the previous year. He's one of the most decorated SEAL officers in the Navy. Then you understand why I asked you to call him. Isabel's mind was spinning. If Tessa was lying, she was doing it with a level of detail and conviction that bordered on the supernatural. But if she was telling the truth, the implications were staggering. Miss Linford, even if everything you're saying is accurate, you still can't prove your service without documentation. Tessa interrupted her, her voice taking on an edge that made Isabel's survival instincts scream warnings. 3 months ago, there was an incident at the port of Oakland. A container ship from Malaysia was flagged by customs for inspection. What they found was supposed to be agricultural equipment, but the manifest didn't match the cargo. The room temperature dropped. The Port of Oakland incident had been classified at the highest levels. Even Isabel's department had only been told it was a customs matter being handled by federal authorities. No details were ever released. The container held components for a dirty bomb, Tessa continued, her eyes like black ice. Cesium-137 packed in lead-lined cases, along with conventional explosives and a timer mechanism. The terrorist cell planning to use it had been under surveillance for months, but they moved up their timeline. The FBI raid happened 6 hours too late. The bomb was already armed and in position. How do you know this? Isabel's voice was barely a whisper, a thread of sound in the sudden terrifying silence, because I was the one who disarmed it. Tessa leaned back, her unnerving calm returning. While FBI agents were still arguing about jurisdiction, I was crawling through a storm drain in downtown Los Angeles with a pair of wire cutters and a prayer. The device was sophisticated enough that one wrong move would have irradiated half of LA County. You want proof of my service, detective? Call Admiral Kavanaugh. Tell him Phantom 7 is in custody. He'll understand. Isabel's notepad slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a quiet thud. The Port of Oakland incident had resulted in several arrests, but the details had been sealed so tightly that even police commanders weren't briefed on what had actually happened. This woman, who was sitting across from her in a generic LAPD t-shirt and jeans, a woman she had dismissed as a fraud, knew things that were a matter of national security. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a case of stolen valor. It was a black ops case. The woman sitting across from her was not a con artist. She was a ghost, a legend. And now Isabel had arrested her. She had a ghost in a box, and she had just been handed the key. The entire world had shifted on its axis, and Isabel realized with a growing, bone-deep dread that she had just stumbled into something far, far above her clearance. This was no longer a simple police case. This was a national emergency. The sterile silence of the interrogation room, once a tool of psychological pressure, had become an oppressive, suffocating weight. Detective Isabel Marquez stared at the woman across from her, the thin file on the table between them now seeming like a cruel joke. The humming of the fluorescent lights and the distant, muffled sounds of the precinct were a faint, meaningless soundtrack to the maelstrom in her mind. Her notepad lay on the floor where it had fallen, a discarded piece of evidence from a case that no longer existed. The woman she had dismissed as a fraud, a sad attention seeker, had just revealed a level of classified knowledge that should not exist outside of a secure briefing room. Tessa Linford remained impassive, her breathing still and even. She was not a person to be interrogated, she was an authority to be listened to. Her stories were not confessions, but carefully chosen facts, delivered with the chilling precision of a marksman. Isabel felt a primal fear rising in her throat, a fear she had only ever heard described in the whispered late-night stories of her brother, the Navy intel officer. The stories of things that went bump in the night, things the public was never meant to know. And now one of those things was sitting across from her. "Operation Leviathan Rift," Tessa began, her voice a low, steady narrative that filled the small space. It was supposed to be a routine hostage extraction. 18 American contractors in Syria. Intelligence suggested they were being held in a compound outside Aleppo. But the intelligence was wrong. It was a trap, designed to draw in American special forces. The compound was rigged with explosives, and the hostages had been moved to a secondary location. Isabel found her voice, a dry, cracked whisper. "The ambush. My brother. He mentioned it. 3 operators killed. They said it was a training accident." Tessa nodded once, a slow, grim acknowledgement. "The initial assault team, 3 of our best SEALs, walked into a kill zone. They died instantly when the building exploded. The rest of the assault was a feint, a diversion to draw attention while the hostages were moved. My team, we were supposed to be backup. But the moment the primary mission failed, we became the primary rescue force." "A 4-person unit," Isabel murmured, recalling the details from Part 2. Against an estimated 30 hostiles, Tessa finished for her. No air support, no backup, and a ticking clock. Intelligence indicated the hostages would be executed at dawn. The interrogation room dissolved, and Isabel was transported into Tessa's memory. The voiceover, rich with the gritty, sensory details of combat, painted a vivid picture. A moonless sky over the Syrian desert, the crunch of sand beneath heavy boots, the metallic smell of blood and cordite in the air. Tessa described the infiltration of the secondary compound with a detached clinical precision, as if she were a surgeon detailing an operation. The silent elimination of the guards, the tense moments spent locating the hostages, the frantic race against time. "It wasn't that clean," Tessa interjected, pulling Isabel back to the present. Her voice was steady, but a shadow of a grim memory flickered in her eyes. "We lost Martinez in the initial breach. Thompson took shrapnel from an RPG and couldn't walk. I had to carry him and 2 wounded hostages through 6 miles of hostile territory while Jenkins provided covering fire." The voiceover continued, describing the harrowing journey, the weight of bodies on her shoulders, the constant fear of a stray bullet, the raw, burning pain of her own wounds as she moved through a landscape crawling with armed enemies. Isabel's gaze was drawn to the scars on Tessa's arm, the physical remnants of the story she was telling. They were not faint or simple, but a complex, jagged roadmap of a life lived on the brink. She saw the larger surgical scars and the faint, pinpoint marks of embedded shrapnel. They were authentic. She had seen enough wounds on the veterans in her unit, on her brother's friends, to know the real thing. It was a silent, undeniable confirmation of every word Tessa had spoken. "How many hostiles?" Isabel began, but Tessa cut her off, her voice devoid of pride or malice. "I personally eliminated 12 hostiles, including the terrorist cell leader who had been planning attacks on American soil. I'd been awake for 36 hours, wounded in 3 places, and was still carrying wounded personnel to safety. The man on my shoulder was one of the CIA assets whose capture would have compromised operations across the entire Middle East. The depth of the story was staggering. This was not the sanitized heroism of Hollywood movies. This was the brutal, unromantic reality of covert operations, where heroes died in anonymity and their sacrifices were buried in classified files. Tessa's unit was a ghost unit, a phantom force called upon when all other options had failed. They existed in the negative space of official records, their lives a paradox of extreme violence and absolute secrecy. "Your file shows a blank page because that's what it was supposed to show," Tessa explained, her voice now a low, chilling whisper. "Our unit was disbanded after the Port of Oakland incident. Too many close calls, too many questions from oversight committees who didn't understand the nature of the threats we were facing. The surviving members were given new identities and told to disappear. Some of us chose to stay disappeared." Isabel felt a cold wave of understanding wash over her. It all made sense. The blank file, the unnerving calm, the specific classified knowledge. This woman, who had been living a quiet life as a trauma counselor, was a ghost of a war no one was supposed to know about. Her entire civilian life was a carefully constructed facade, a protective shield against the enemies she had made in the dark. "The Port of Oakland incident," Isabel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said you disarmed a dirty bomb." Tessa's gaze was steady, her eyes like black ice. "The FBI was late. They were 6 hours too late. I was the one who disarmed it. Alone, with wire cutters and a prayer." The device was sophisticated, a mix of cesium-137 and conventional explosives with a timer. One wrong move would have irradiated half of LA County. I spent a full hour in a storm drain in downtown Los Angeles with a single pair of wire cutters and the knowledge that if I made one mistake, the consequences would be catastrophic. The details were staggering in their specificity and their sheer terror. Isabel felt her own hands shaking just imagining it. The smell of the storm drain, the metallic tang of fear in the air, the cold, stark reality of life and death resting on the precise cut of a single wire. It was a story so audacious, so utterly unbelievable, that it could only be true. No fraud could invent such a thing with such brutal, visceral detail. "You said your commander was Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell," Isabel said, her voice now filled with a new kind of respect. "The man who is now Admiral Hunter Cavanaugh." Tessa nodded, a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of a memory of a time when the man she now referred to as an admiral was a team leader, a man in the thick of the fight. "He's the only person who can confirm my identity. He's the only one who truly knows who and what I am." The interrogation had come to an end, not because Isabel had broken her, but because Tessa had broken her. Tessa hadn't confessed to a crime. She had revealed a truth so profound and so dangerous that it had shattered Isabel's perception of the world. The room was now a tomb, a repository of a secret that Isabel was not equipped to handle. The weight of that knowledge was a physical burden, pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her. Isabel finally stood up, her movements unsteady, her mind a frantic blur of shock and realization. The case file, the handcuffs, the legal procedures, they were all meaningless now. She had a legend in a cage, and the key to that cage was a phone call to one of the most powerful and decorated military officers in the United States. A phone call that would likely change her life forever. And, as Tessa had subtly implied, bring down a storm of national security protocols that would make her small-town police precinct seem like a distant, innocent memory. She picked up her notepad, its pages now filled with the scribbled notes of a ghost story, and made her way to the door. As she reached for the handle, Tessa's voice stopped her, calm and final. "Detective, when you call the Admiral, you might want to mention that my cover has been blown. He's going to want to know how that happened. And he's not going to be happy about it." The door closed behind Isabel with a soft, ominous click that seemed to echo through the silence of the room. She was alone in the hallway, the phone in her hand feeling heavy as a stone. Her mind was already racing, preparing the words she would use, the specific phrase, the classified name that would unlock a world of secrets. She had walked into a routine stolen valor case, and she was walking out with the knowledge that she had just arrested one of the most classified assets in the United States military. The simple act of dialing a phone number was about to trigger a cascade of events that would ripple far beyond the walls of her precinct. The ghost had been caught, and now the living would have to deal with the consequences. The call ended with an abrupt, chilling finality. Detective Isabel Marquez stood in the hallway, the receiver cold in her hand, the dial tone a buzzing, insistent sound in the oppressive silence. On the other end of the line, Admiral Hunter Cavanaugh, one of the most decorated officers in the United States Navy, had given a series of terse, unyielding orders: treat her well, keep her secure, and if anyone asks, you tell them this case has been classified, pending federal review, no exceptions. His voice had been a low, controlled growl, the sound of a man trying to suppress an earthquake with his bare hands. Isabel's mind was a frantic blur, her thoughts a chaotic symphony of fear and disbelief. She had done it. She had followed a ghost's instructions and, in doing so, had opened a door to a world she was never meant to see. Across town, a motorcade of black SUVs moved with a speed and purpose that defied San Diego traffic. This was not a politician's entourage, it was a military convoy on an operational footing. Admiral Hunter Cavanaugh, his dress blues immaculate and a constellation of ribbons on his chest telling the story of 3 decades of distinguished service, sat in the lead vehicle. But his face was a mask of barely controlled rage that made his aide, Petty Officer Davis, shrink into his seat. The Admiral's fury wasn't a loud theatrical outburst. It was a cold, quiet storm brewing beneath the surface, a dangerous calm that usually preceded combat operations. Word was already spreading through the intelligence community, a phantom whisper of a compromised asset, and the calls from Washington were starting to flood his secure line. The Director of National Intelligence himself had called, demanding to know why one of their most closely guarded secrets had just been arrested by a local police department. The sound of heavy boots echoing down the sterile halls of LAPD Central Division was a symphony of impending authority. As the glass doors of the precinct exploded inward, it was not an exaggeration to say that Admiral Hunter Cavanaugh stormed the entrance like a force of nature. He was a man of immense physical presence, and his fury amplified it tenfold. Behind him, his security detail moved with the fluid, silent precision of a special operations team. These were not police officers or uniformed guards, they were veterans, 4 men in dark suits whose eyes constantly scanned for threats, their earpieces crackling with encrypted communications. The lead agent flashed credentials to the desk sergeant, a 20-year veteran who thought he had seen everything. The man's face went pale. "I need to see your commanding officer immediately." Mitchell's voice carried the kind of authority that had once directed operations across multiple theaters of war. "And I need to see Sarah Chun now." The desk sergeant, whose name was Williams, found himself stammering like a rookie. "Sir, "I'll need to check with—" "You'll need to do exactly what I tell you to do, Sergeant." The Admiral's steel-grey eyes fixed on him with a laser intensity. "This is a matter of national security that is currently spiraling out of control because someone in this building decided to arrest one of the most classified assets in the United States military." The lobby fell into a profound silence, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of radio chatter. Civilians waiting to file reports pressed themselves against the walls as the Admiral's security detail established a perimeter, their movement suggesting they were prepared for anything. Police Chief Robert Martinez, a man who had spent over a decade navigating the complex relationship between civilian law enforcement and the military, emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. Nothing had prepared him for the sight of a decorated Navy admiral, accompanied by what appeared to be a federal security team, laying waste to his precinct. "Admiral Kavanaugh, I presume," Martinez said, extending his hand, trying to project a calm authority he was far from feeling. "I'm Chief Martinez. I understand you're here about the Linford case." The Admiral ignored the offered handshake, instead reaching into his jacket and producing a leather folder marked with classification stamps that made Martinez's blood run cold. "Chief, I need you to look at this document very carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then, I need you to understand that you are currently holding someone whose arrest has triggered security protocols at the highest levels of government." Martinez opened the folder with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the first page before widening in shock. The document bore the seal of the Department of Defense and was signed by officials whose names he recognized from news broadcasts. What he read made his mouth go dry. "This can't be right," Martinez whispered, his face pale. "The person we arrested is a woman. She was at a veteran support group. She's not what, Chief?" The Admiral's voice dropped to a dangerous level of quiet. "Not capable? Not qualified? Let me tell you what Tessa Linford is capable of." He leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them. "She has more confirmed kills than your entire SWAT team combined. She has extracted assets from situations that would give your best officers nightmares. She has prevented terrorist attacks that would have made 9/11 look like a warm-up exercise." The Admiral's security detail had quietly cleared the lobby of civilians, their efficiency suggesting this wasn't their first time handling a classified crisis. Detective Isabel Marquez appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the commotion, and froze when she saw the scene unfolding below. The Admiral's voice, a powerful, commanding force, continued to reverberate through the lobby. "But more than that," he said, his voice rising with each word, "she saved my son's life in Kandahar." Lieutenant Samuel Kavanaugh, Marine Corps, was part of a convoy that got hit by a coordinated ambush. 3 vehicles destroyed, 12 Marines pinned down by sniper fire, no hope of extraction. Chief Martinez found himself leaning forward despite his shock, caught up in the Admiral's raw intensity. Tessa Linford was operating in the area as part of a completely different mission. She had no orders to intervene, no backup, no support, but when she heard that Marines were dying, she made a choice. The Admiral's voice cracked slightly. She spent 14 hours moving through enemy territory, taking out sniper positions one by one, creating a corridor for medical evacuation. "My son lived because a woman you just arrested for stolen valor decided that no American would die on her watch if she could prevent it." The silence in the lobby was deafening. Martinez stared at the folder in his hands, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. "Sir," he said carefully, "if Miss Linford's service record is classified at this level, how are we supposed to know? Her file shows basic Navy service, nothing more." The Admiral's laugh was bitter and humorless. "Her file shows exactly what it's supposed to show, nothing. Do you think we advertise the identities of our most sensitive assets? Do you think we put their real accomplishments in databases that any desk jockey can access?" Detective Isabel Marquez descended the stairs slowly, her hand clutching a notepad. "Admiral, I was the investigating officer. Miss Linford told me to call you specifically. She said to mention Phantom 7. The Admiral's head snapped toward her, his expression shifting from anger to something approaching panic. "She used that designation in an official police interview?" "Yes, sir." "She also mentioned Operation Leviathan Rift and the Port of Oakland incident." The Admiral closed his eyes and took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. When he opened them again, his face had gone ashen. "Chief Martinez, I need to speak with Miss Linford immediately, and then I need to make some very difficult phone calls to Washington." "Sir, what's the problem?" Isabel asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The Admiral looked at her with the expression of a man watching his worst fears come to life. "The problem, Detective, is that Tessa Linford has been operating under deep cover for 3 years. Her identity as a trauma counselor, her work with veterans, her entire civilian life, it was all carefully constructed to keep her safe from the enemy she made during her operational career." He gestured toward the folder in Martinez's hands. "There are terrorist organizations, foreign intelligence services, and criminal networks that would pay millions for the chance to get their hands on her. She knows things that could compromise ongoing operations across 3 continents. The implications hit Isabel like a physical blow, and now her cover is blown. Completely and irreparably blown," the Admiral confirmed. "By tomorrow morning, every intelligence service in the world will know that Phantom 7 is alive and operating in Los Angeles. They'll know her civilian identity, her address, her daily routine. They'll know about the veterans she's been helping, the people she's grown close to." Chief Martinez felt sick. "Admiral, we had no way of knowing." "I'm not blaming you, Chief," the Admiral interrupted, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm blaming the system that put her in this position. We asked her to disappear, to become someone else, to live a quiet life helping other veterans heal from their trauma. And she did it perfectly. Until today." The Admiral's secure phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen before his expression darkened further. "That's the Director of National Intelligence. He wants to know why one of our most classified assets just got arrested for stolen valor and had her cover blown by a disgruntled Marine with a grudge." He looked around the lobby, taking in the faces of the police officers who were beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. "Gentlemen, Detective Marquez, what started as a simple stolen valor case has just become a national security crisis, and the woman sitting in your holding cell, the woman you arrested for impersonating a SEAL, is about to pay the price for our failure to protect her." As the Admiral headed toward the holding area, his security detail falling into formation around him, Chief Martinez stared down at the classified folder in his hands. Inside was a single photograph. Tessa Linford, in full combat gear, standing next to a burning building in what looked like a Middle Eastern city. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but her eyes held the same calm intensity he had seen in the surveillance footage from her arrest. At the bottom of the photo, in neat military script, was a single line that made his hand shake. Phantom 7. 47 confirmed kills, 23 successful extractions, 3 prevented terrorist attacks. Status classified. Deceased. Cover identity. The woman they had arrested for stolen valor wasn't just a Navy SEAL. She was a ghost who had been forced back into the light, and the consequences of that exposure were about to ripple far beyond the walls of a small police station in Los Angeles. The holding area at LAPD Central Division was a world away from the sterile bureaucracy of the precinct upstairs. It was a sterile concrete box, a place of last resort, of desperation and despair. Yet in one of the cells, an impossible calm had settled. Tessa Linford sat on the narrow metal bench with perfect posture, her breathing steady and controlled, as if she were meditating rather than awaiting interrogation for a federal crime. Her presence, a quiet, unyielding island of stillness, had a strange, almost gravitational effect on the other detainees. Maria Santis, a tough gang member who had been arrested for assault, found herself inexplicably drawn to the quiet woman in the corner cell. Maria's world was one of chaos and aggression, of noise and threats, but Tessa was a profound, silent challenge to that reality. "Hey, Navy girl," Maria called out during the afternoon shift change, her voice laced with a mixture of bravado and curiosity. "You really one of them special forces types?" Tessa looked up from her perfect meditation posture, her dark eyes meeting Maria's with a directness that didn't judge or flinch. "Why do you ask?" "'Cause you got that look, you know? Like my cousin Rico when he came back from Afghanistan, like you seen some that changed you." Maria's bravado was a thin veneer, and Tessa, with her trained eye for reading people, saw through it instantly. She noted the defensive posture, the way Maria held her left shoulder slightly forward to protect old knife wounds, the hypervigilance that spoke of a life lived in constant low-level danger. "You have nightmares," Tessa said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Maria's tough facade cracked slightly, a fracture in her armor. "Sometimes, dreams about my little sister. She got caught in crossfire when I was running with the Diablos. I wasn't there to protect her." "Survivor's guilt," Tessa said, moving closer to the bars between their cells. "It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about your brain trying to process trauma by creating scenarios where you had control. The guilt is actually a defense mechanism. It's easier to blame yourself than to accept that sometimes terrible things happen randomly." As Tessa spoke, using the same precise clinical language she had learned in her special operations training and honed in her trauma counseling work, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine calm. The impromptu therapy session was a strange, mesmerizing spectacle. Other detainees began gathering near their cell doors, drawn by the quiet authority in Tessa's voice. A young man named Sher James, arrested for drunk driving, spoke up. "My brother died in a car accident while I was deployed. I keep thinking if I'd been home." "Temporal displacement," Tessa replied without hesitation. "Your mind is trying to rewrite history because the alternative, accepting that you couldn't have changed anything, feels unbearable. But healing starts with accepting that you can't control the past, only how you respond to it." Guard Sergeant Manny Torres watched this with growing amazement. In 20 years of corrections work, he had never seen anything like it. The holding area, usually filled with tension and hostility, had become strangely peaceful. Even the most hardened criminals were listening intently, their faces rapt as Tessa spoke. "Ma'am," Torres said quietly, approaching Tessa's cell, "I don't know who you are, but what you're doing here, it's something special." Tessa looked up at him with those unsettling dark eyes. "Everyone deserves a chance to heal, Sergeant. Sometimes they just need someone to show them how." Torres nodded, then leaned closer. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're a fake. I've seen a lot of veterans come through here, and you're different. There's something about you that feels real." While Tessa was performing her quiet psychological work in the holding cell, the precinct upstairs was spiraling into chaos. The motorcade of black SUVs had left, but they had left a storm in their wake. Chief Robert Martinez and Detective Isabel Marquez, along with the rest of the brass, stood in hushed, frightened knots in the main office, their phones ringing incessantly. The calls weren't from other police precincts. They were from federal agencies with names Isabel had never heard of, all asking about the Linford case and being told per Admiral Kavanaugh's orders that it was classified. The most unsettling call had come to Isabel's desk phone. The caller, claiming to be CIA, had not asked for identification. Instead, they had rattled off her badge number, her home address, and the name of her brother's intelligence unit. Before hanging up with a chilling warning, you are to take no further action regarding your current case until properly briefed federal authorities arrive. This is a matter of national security. The chaos in the precinct was mirrored in the digital world. A freelance journalist named Sage Tran, a determined, relentless reporter with a reputation for sniffing out stories before anyone else, had received an anonymous tip. The tip contained two things: a grainy, dark image of Tessa Linford in her cell and a brief coded summary of her true identity. Sage Tran was no stranger to the shadows of the military and intelligence community. She had spent years cultivating sources, and she recognized the code names and the implications instantly. This was not a routine police story. This was a scoop that could blow the doors off a national security secret. Working with a speed born of journalistic instinct, Sage Tran wrote a short, punchy article. The headline blared across a small, independent news site: "She's not fake, she's the ghost." The article detailed the initial stolen valor charge, the cryptic hints from sources that the woman was a phantom operator, and the unprecedented military response. Sage knew it would be a flash in the pan, a digital ghost that would be hunted and erased with extreme prejudice. But she also knew that in the age of the internet, even a ghost could leave a permanent scar. She hit publish, and within seconds, her article was live. The response was immediate and violent. The moment the article hit the wire, the full force of the military intelligence community descended. The site was hacked and the article forcibly taken down within minutes, the digital footprint scrubbed from the internet with a surgical precision that left behind no trace. But it was too late. The brief window of exposure had already allowed the story to spread. Screenshots were taken, rumors were whispered, and the name Phantom 7 began to circulate in the dark corners of the internet, a digital spectre that could not be fully erased. The national buzz was palpable. Back at the precinct, the phones continued to ring. The calls were now more direct, more demanding. The military intelligence community was no longer asking for a favor, they were issuing a direct command. Chief Martinez, a man who had always believed in the sanctity of civilian law, was suddenly confronted with a reality that operated on a completely different set of rules. The authority was no longer his. The case was no longer his. He was just a pawn in a game he didn't understand, a game with stakes so high they were measured in national security, not local crime statistics. He looked at Isabel Marquez, whose face was a mirror of his own growing dread. They had been left out in the cold, holding a bomb that they had no idea how to defuse. The final call came from Admiral Kavanaugh himself. His voice, now devoid of rage, was a cold, hard instrument of command. "Chief Martinez, we are now in the red. The situation has been compromised. We are implementing a full-scale extraction protocol. We have a narrow window to get Miss Linford to a secure location before her enemies realize the full extent of the leak." The Admiral's words were a cold, brutal assessment of their failure. "You and your department have lost control of this situation. We are taking over. Get her ready. I am on my way." The weight of the Admiral's command hung in the air, a final, unyielding verdict. The local police department, the entire system of civilian law they represented, had been sidelined and rendered powerless. They were witnesses to their own obsolescence, a painful reality they had to face. They had arrested a ghost, and now the forces that had created her were coming to claim her. Chief Martinez looked around his office, a place that had always felt like his kingdom, and realized with a sickening lurch that it was now just a temporary command post in a much larger, much more dangerous war. They had been tasked with a simple stolen valor case, and in doing so, they had accidentally revealed a national security secret that was now spiraling out of control. The decision had been made. Tessa Linford, the trauma counselor, was about to be extracted, and the life she had built was about to come crashing down. The electronic locks on Tessa's cell disengaged with a soft final click that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet holding area. Admiral Hunter Kavanaugh stepped aside as the door swung open, but Tessa did not immediately move. She took a moment, her dark eyes sweeping across the other detainees who had been listening so intently to her story. Maria Santis, Sher James, and the others who had found an unexpected, fragile comfort in her words. She looked at them not as criminals, but as fellow survivors. "Remember what we talked about," she said quietly to Maria, her voice a gentle command. "The guilt serves a purpose, but don't let it define you. Your sister would want you to live, not just survive." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face, the tough facade completely shattered. "Will we see you again?" she asked, her voice trembling with raw vulnerability. Tessa's smile was gentle but sad. "I don't think so. But you don't need me anymore. You have the tools now. Use them." As Tessa stepped out of the cell, Sergeant Manny Torres approached, his face a mixture of awe and regret. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet with respect, "I just want to say what you did in there, helping those people, that's the real heroism. Not the classified stuff, but the way you cared about broken people nobody else wanted to help." Tessa accepted her personal effects, her eyes falling on the small, almost faded Navy SEAL trident pin. She looked at it for a long moment, a ghost of a memory flashing in her eyes, then handed it back to Torres. "Give this to someone who needs to remember that service comes in many forms," she said. "Sometimes the most important battles are fought in support groups and therapy sessions, not on foreign battlefields." Admiral Kavanaugh's security detail had transformed the police station into a temporary high-security command center. Agents with earpieces moved with purpose, coordinating with unseen forces, their encrypted communications crackling through the air. Chief Martinez watched, his mind reeling, as he realized the true scope of the operation required to protect one person. The Admiral approached him, his phone buzzing with constant updates. "Chief," he said, his expression grim, "we need to discuss security protocols for your officers who were involved." Tessa's enemies are sophisticated. They'll try to trace back everyone who had contact with her. Martinez felt his stomach drop. "Are my people in danger?" he whispered. "Potentially," the Admiral replied. "We're implementing protective measures, but I need you to understand that this situation extends far beyond your jurisdiction now." He looked at Detective Isabel Marquez, who stood a few feet away, her face pale. Detective Marquez in particular will need to be briefed on operational security. She knows too much to be left unprotected. Across the station, Isabel was experiencing her own personal crisis of understanding. The case that had started as routine stolen valor had become a window into a world she never knew existed, a world where heroes operated. In complete anonymity, where the most significant victories were never celebrated, and where the price of service was measured in isolation and constant danger. Tessa approached her quietly, her movements so fluid and silent that Isabel didn't hear her until she was standing next to her. "I want you to know that you did your job correctly," Tessa said. "You investigated thoroughly. You asked the right questions, and you treated me with respect even when you had doubts. That's all anyone can ask." Isabel looked at this woman, this legend, with a profound sense of awe. "I almost didn't believe you," she said. "Even with all the evidence, part of me thought that I was too ordinary to be a part of this." Tessa's laugh was understanding, devoid of malice. "That's the point. The best operators are the ones who can disappear into normal life. We're not the Hollywood version of special forces. We're the people you pass on the street without a second glance." "What happens to you now?" Isabel asked. Tessa's expression grew distant. "I disappear again. New identity, new location, new life. The woman you arrested, Tessa Linford, trauma counselor. She ceases to exist as of today." The weight of that statement hit Isabel like a physical blow. But your work with veterans, the people you've been helping, will continue, Tessa said, her voice filled with a deep sadness. Just not by me. The techniques I developed, the protocols I created, they'll be passed on to other therapists. The veterans I've been working with will be transitioned to new counselors who can continue their treatment. Before Tessa could respond, a commotion near the main entrance caught everyone's attention. Ray Delgado, the veteran who had reported her, was arguing with the security detail, demanding to be let inside. His face was a mask of guilt and horror. "I need to see her," he pleaded, his voice carrying through the glass doors. "I need to apologize. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Admiral Kavanaugh's expression hardened. "That's the man who started this," he said coldly. But Tessa studied Ray through the glass doors, seeing the anguish on his face, the way his hand shook as he pleaded with the agents. "Let him in, Jim," she said quietly. "He deserves to understand what his anger caused." Against his better judgment, the Admiral nodded to his security team. Ray was escorted inside, his eyes immediately finding Tessa across the lobby. He approached slowly, his face a mask of guilt and regret. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. "I had no idea. When they told me who you really are, what you've done—" His voice broke. "I destroyed your life because I was angry about my own failures." Tessa stepped forward, her movement causing several agents to tense, but she simply placed a hand on Ray's shoulder. "You didn't destroy my life, Ray. You changed it. There's a difference." Her voice was calm, accepting. "And maybe this needed to happen. Maybe I was getting too comfortable, too attached to a life that was always temporary. You acted from pain, not malice. I understand that better than most." "How can you forgive me?" Ray asked, tears streaming down his face. "I've ruined everything for you, because holding on to anger would only hurt both of us," Tessa replied. "You made a mistake, but you made it for the right reasons. You thought you were protecting the honor of real veterans. That intention matters, even if the execution was flawed." Admiral Kavanaugh checked his watch, his impatience growing. "Tessa, we really need to move. Every minute we delay increases the risk." Tessa nodded, then turned back to Ray. "I want you to do something for me," she said. "Continue coming to the support group. Work with Dr. Mendoza on your anger and your feelings of inadequacy. Help other veterans who are struggling. Turn this mistake into something positive." "I will," Ray promised. "I swear I will." As Tessa moved toward the exit, surrounded by the Admiral's security detail, she paused to look back at the police station that had been her temporary prison. Detective Isabel Marquez, Chief Martinez, Sergeant Torres, and the other officers watched her go, understanding that they had witnessed something that would never appear in any official report. "Detective Marquez," Tessa called out as she reached the door. "Remember what I told you about the Port of Oakland incident? If anyone ever asks you about it, you don't know anything. Some secrets are worth keeping." The convoy of black SUVs pulled away from the police station, their presence a silent, ominous shadow disappearing into the Los Angeles traffic. Inside the lead vehicle, Tessa watched the familiar streets disappear behind them. "Any regrets?" Admiral Kavanaugh asked, his voice low. Tessa was quiet for a long moment, watching her reflection in the window, a woman at peace with herself and her decisions. "I regret that Ray will carry guilt about this for the rest of his life. I regret that the veterans I was working with will have to start over with new therapists. I regret that good people got caught up in something they never should have been exposed to. But do you regret the service, the missions, the choices that led to this moment?" Tessa's reflection showed a woman at peace with herself and her decisions. "No. Every mission we completed, every life we saved, every attack we prevented, it was worth it. The work I did with veterans these past 3 years was worth it too. If the price of that service is living in the shadows, then that's a price I'm willing to pay." The legend of Phantom 7 began to spread through whispered conversations among those who had witnessed her brief return to the light. But Tessa Linford, trauma counselor and healer of wounded warriors, had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. In her place was once again a ghost of legend, operating in the spaces between official records, protecting a nation that would never know her name. That brings us to the end of Tessa's story, or perhaps just the beginning of her next chapter. The woman who walked into that police station, accused of being a fake, was revealed to be a ghost, a legend forged in the crucible of war. Her journey reminds us that heroism isn't always celebrated on a podium or etched on a memorial wall. Sometimes the most profound acts of courage happen in the shadows, far from the public eye. Tessa's story is a powerful testament to the fact that the greatest battles are often fought not with guns and grenades, but with compassion and empathy. She chose to use her skills not to destroy, but to heal, proving that a warrior's strength is just as vital in a therapy session as it is on a battlefield. We want to thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. This story, and others like it, are what the veteran biker community is all about. Finding the truth behind the headlines and honoring the quiet heroes among us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was the most impactful part of Tessa's story for you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring these powerful stories, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. You can also check out our other videos appearing on your screen now. Until next time, ride safe and keep the faith.